The ancient trees of the Pacific Northwest stood like towering sentinels, their massive trunks disappearing into a canopy so thick that even at midday, the forest floor remained shrouded in perpetual twilight. Centuries of rainfall had created a cathedral of moss-draped giants, their bark scarred by countless seasons and their roots intertwined in a network that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. It was into this primordial wilderness that three men, Johnny, Dale, and Tommy, ventured with their high-powered rifles and foolish confidence, their expensive gear and city-bred arrogance making them feel invincible against whatever primitive creatures might lurk in these forgotten depths. They had driven for hours through increasingly narrow mountain roads, following rumors and half-whispered tales from locals whose weathered faces had gone pale when they spoke of creatures moving through the deep woods, massive forms that left 18-inch footprints in the mud and broke branches 20 feet above the ground with casual ease. The men had laughed at the fear in those ancient eyes, dismissing it as backward superstition designed to keep outsiders away from the best hunting grounds, but something about the oppressive silence of these woods began to gnaw at their bravado as they made camp in a small meadow that seemed carved from the surrounding darkness. The clearing felt profoundly wrong somehow, too perfectly circular and geometrically precise to be natural, as if something had deliberately carved out this space in the otherwise impenetrable forest with tools and intelligence far beyond what any known animal possessed. The grass grew in strange patterns that seemed to spiral inward toward the center, and no insects buzzed in the stagnant air despite the lush vegetation that should have supported countless forms of life. As they pitched their tent in the dying light, the usual sounds of the wilderness, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, even the whisper of wind through leaves, were conspicuously absent, replaced by a silence so complete it made their ears ring and their hearts pound with inexplicable dread. Even the wind seemed to avoid this accursed place, leaving the air stagnant and heavy with the smell of decay and something else, something musky and wild and alien that made their skin crawl and their primitive hindbrains scream warnings they were too civilized to heed. Johnny tried to shake off the mounting unease as he methodically assembled his rifle, checking and rechecking the scope with the obsessive attention of a man trying to distract himself from growing terror, while Dale nervously joked about bagging the biggest trophy of their lives, his forced laughter echoing unnaturally in the oppressive stillness. Tommy remained silent throughout their preparations, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line with the desperate vigilance of prey, unable to shake the overwhelming feeling that they were being watched by unseen eyes that tracked their every movement from the impenetrable shadows between the ancient trees, studying them with an intelligence that was disturbingly, terrifyingly familiar. After a meager meal that none of them seemed able to finish, the food tasting like ash in their mouths while their stomachs churned with anxiety they couldn't name, the three men loaded their weapons with unnecessary care and ventured into the forest as darkness began to creep across the sky like spilled ink, bringing with it a cold that seemed to seep directly into their bones. Their flashlights cut thin, pathetic beams through the oppressive blackness, illuminating gnarled roots that looked like twisted limbs and moss-covered logs that seemed to shift and move in their peripheral vision, taking on the appearance of crouching figures that vanished the moment they turned their lights directly upon them. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them with malevolent intent, branches reaching out like skeletal fingers to snag their clothing and scratch their faces with deliberate malice, while the path they had been following gradually disappeared beneath a carpet of fallen leaves that muffled their footsteps and made them feel as though they were walking through a vast, natural tomb. Strange sounds echoed through the trees with increasing frequency, not quite animal, not quite human, but something that fell into the terrifying valley between the two, distant calls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, making it impossible to determine the direction or distance, as if the very forest itself was alive and breathing around them, communicating in a language older than human speech. The temperature dropped with alarming suddenness, plunging from merely cool to brutally cold in the span of minutes, their breath forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air that seemed to glow with an unnatural luminescence as they pressed deeper into territory that felt increasingly hostile and alien with each step. Johnny led the way with grim determination, his rifle ready and his jaw clenched, trying to project the confidence he no longer felt while his hands shook with something that was definitely not just the cold, while Dale and Tommy followed close behind, their own weapons trembling in their increasingly unsteady hands as they jumped at every shadow and flinched at every sound. The beam of Tommy's flashlight suddenly caught something that made his blood freeze in his veins, massive prints in the soft earth, far too large to belong to any known animal, pressed deep into the ground with such tremendous force that the edges were perfectly preserved despite the dampness of the forest floor and the constant drizzle that had begun to fall like tears from the invisible sky. The prints were impossibly deep, suggesting a weight that defied comprehension, and they led away into the darkness ahead in a straight line that spoke of purpose and destination, and against every instinct screaming at them to turn back, to flee this cursed place and never return. The three men found themselves following the trail deeper into the nightmare that awaited them in the heart of the ancient woods, drawn forward by a combination of morbid curiosity and the terrible certainty that they had already passed the point of no return. It was Dale who first spotted them through the dense undergrowth, his sharp intake of breath alerting the others to the presence of something that should not exist in any rational world, towering silhouettes moving between the trees with an impossible combination of fluid grace and raw, terrifying power that spoke of millions of years of evolution in the deep places of the earth where humanity had never set foot. The creatures stood well over 8 feet tall, their massive frames covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb the weak light from their flashlights like a living void, while their shoulders were broad enough to snap trees and their arms hung nearly to their knees with the promise of crushing strength. There were at least 5 of them, maybe more, lurking in the shadows beyond the reach of their lights, their glowing eyes reflecting the illumination like burning coals while they moved through their domain with the quiet confidence of apex predators who had never known fear, never known defeat, never known anything but absolute dominance over their territory. Their faces were a horrifying blend of human and animal features, intelligent eyes set in bestial skulls, lips that could have been human if not for the fangs that gleamed wetly in the darkness, and expressions that conveyed not just animal cunning but something far more terrifying, the cold, calculating intelligence of a species that had watched humanity's rise from the shadows and found it wanting. For a moment that stretched into eternity, both species stared at each other across the primordial divide that separated civilization from the wild, and in that terrible silence broken only by the drip of moisture from unseen branches, the three men realized with growing horror that they were not the hunters here. They were the prey, small and weak and pathetic, and they had wandered directly into the territory of something far older and infinitely more dangerous than anything their civilized minds could comprehend or their modern weapons could hope to defeat. The spell broke when Johnny raised his rifle with hands that shook so violently he could barely aim, and fired a shot that cracked through the forest like thunder, the muzzle flash illuminating the scene for one brief, hellish instant before plunging him back into darkness. The bullet found its mark, striking one of the creatures in the shoulder and drawing forth an inhuman roar of pain and rage that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet and rattle their teeth in their skulls. But instead of falling, instead of dying as any normal animal should, the wounded creature merely staggered back a step, its eyes blazing with a fury that spoke of ancient intelligence and deep, primal hatred for the small, weak things that dared to wound one of their own. What followed was chaos beyond description as the other creatures erupted into motion, their massive forms crashing through the underbrush with impossible speed despite their size, their powerful legs carrying them over fallen logs and through dense thickets as if such obstacles simply didn't exist, while their coordinated movements spoke of pack intelligence and hunting strategies refined over countless generations. Dale and Tommy opened fire as well, their shots wild and panicked, most missing their targets entirely as terror made their hands shake and their vision blur, the few bullets that did connect seeming to do little more than enrage the creatures further as they closed the distance with terrifying speed, their burning eyes never leaving the three men who had dared to invade their realm. The three men ran as they had never run before, crashing through the forest in blind panic while branches tore at their clothes and faces like grasping claws, leaving bloody scratches that they barely felt through their overwhelming terror. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder and more terrifying with each passing second, the heavy thud of massive feet hitting the ground in perfect rhythm, the crack of breaking branches as the creatures smashed through obstacles that would have stopped a normal animal, and worst of all, the intelligent, coordinated calls of the creatures as they communicated with each other in their hunt, their voices rising and falling in patterns that spoke of language and strategy and a level of organization that made the men's blood run cold. Johnny stumbled over a hidden root and nearly fell, his rifle flying from his hands to disappear into the undergrowth with a crash that seemed to echo mockingly through the trees, but he scrambled to his feet and kept running, driven by pure terror and the certain knowledge that to stop, even for a moment, meant death of a kind that his mind refused to contemplate. The beam of Tommy's flashlight swung wildly as he ran, occasionally illuminating a massive form keeping pace with him through the trees, always just at the edge of vision, herding them like wolves driving sheep toward the slaughter, while the creature's intelligence became increasingly apparent in the way they flanked their prey and cut off potential escape routes with tactical precision that would have impressed military strategists. They burst into the clearing where their SUV waited like a metal sanctuary in the darkness, and for a brief, desperate moment, hope flared in their hearts like a dying ember as they fumbled for the keys with hands made clumsy by terror and adrenaline, their fingers slipping on the metal while precious seconds ticked away. The engine roared to life with a sound that seemed almost comically normal after the nightmare they had endured, and Dale gunned the accelerator with desperate fury, but before they could escape, before they could flee this cursed place and return to the safety of civilization, powerful hands seized the rear of the SUV with such tremendous force that the entire vehicle shuddered and groaned under the strain, metal bending and glass cracking under the inhuman grip. The wheels spun uselessly in the dirt, sending up clouds of earth and smoke, but gaining no traction as more creatures emerged from the tree line like demons materializing from hell itself, surrounding their would-be sanctuary with eyes that burned with intelligence and terrible purpose, their massive forms blocking out the stars and creating a ring of living darkness around the trapped vehicle. The creatures moved with deliberate coordination, some holding the vehicle in place while others began to circle it like predators assessing wounded prey, their glowing eyes never leaving the three men huddled inside who could only watch in growing horror as their protection became their tomb. What followed was a symphony of destruction that would have been beautiful in its terrible precision if not for the lives hanging in the balance, as the creatures began their methodical assault on the vehicle with tools and techniques that spoke of intelligence far beyond what any animal should possess. Their massive fists and improvised clubs of stone and wood pounded against the metal with relentless fury, each blow calculated for maximum effect, targeting weak points in the vehicle's structure with the expertise of engineers who understood exactly how to dismantle their prey's defenses. The windows spider-webbed and shattered under the assault, raining glass down on the three men huddled inside like crystalline tears, their screams of terror mixing with desperate prayers to a god who seemed absent from this primordial place where older, darker powers held sway over life and death. "Please, God, help us," Tommy sobbed as a massive fist punched through the roof with a sound like breaking bones, followed by an arm covered in coarse, dark fur that reached down toward him with fingers like iron spikes, each digit ending in claws that could have torn through steel. The creatures worked with terrifying intelligence, coordinating their attack to systematically dismantle their metal prison, peeling it apart like a tin can while the men inside could only watch in horror as their protection crumbled away piece by piece, their prayers growing more frantic and desperate as the inevitable drew closer with each thunderous blow. The end came with shocking swiftness once the creatures finally broke through completely, their massive forms filling the destroyed interior of the SUV as they reached for the three men with hands that could crush bone like dry twigs and tear flesh like paper. The screams that echoed through the forest that night were heard by no living soul, cut short with a finality that spoke of swift and brutal justice meted out by creatures far older than human civilization, their cries swallowed by the ancient trees that had witnessed countless such scenes over the millennia. Johnny made one final, futile attempt to fight back, his fists beating uselessly against the creature that lifted him from the wreckage, but his struggles ended as quickly as they began, his body going limp with a wet, tearing sound that would have made observers sick if there had been any left alive to witness it. Dale and Tommy's fates were sealed just as quickly, their lives snuffed out with the casual efficiency of apex predators who had been perfecting their killing techniques since before humanity first glimpsed fire, their bodies joining their friends in a grotesque tableau that painted the clearing red under the pitiless stars. When hikers found the wreckage 3 days later, following reports of strange sounds and the smell of death that had begun to attract scavengers from miles around, even experienced search and rescue personnel were reduced to stunned silence by the scene that greeted them, twisted metal scattered across the clearing like the remains of some apocalyptic explosion, and within it, evidence of violence so savage and complete that the local police would speak of it only in whispers for years to come, their official reports sanitized and incomplete because the truth was too terrible for civilized minds to accept. To this day, the official report lists the cause of death as animal attack by unknown predator, but among the locals who know these woods and respect their ancient secrets, The truth is spoken in hushed tones around campfires when the night grows dark and the wind carries strange sounds from the deep forest, that 3 men went hunting monsters in territories that were never meant for human feet, and the monsters hunted them back, teaching them too late that some legends are born from terrible truth, some boundaries should never be crossed, and some ancient powers still rule in the dark places of the world where civilization's light has never penetrated the eternal shadows.